That night, nearly 50,000 civilians remained in Zwolle. Families in basements, children who had never known peacetime. The city was held by fewer than 300 German soldiers. Among them stood one Canadian soldier, ready to take a risk, relying on psychology rather than firepower. April 1945. Night over Zwolle. Canadian artillery batteries were already laid in, guns calibrated. Forward observers had marked target grids across the city center. If the order came, high-explosive shells would begin falling within minutes. Inside the perimeter of the city were approximately 50,000 civilians, families sheltering in basements, elderly residents who had endured 5 years of occupation, children who had never known peacetime. The Canadian command did not intend destruction without cause. But intelligence suggested German resistance remained inside Zwolle. If the city was defended in strength, artillery would precede infantry. Private Leo Major stood on the eastern approach road, 8 kilometers from the city limits. The temperature hovered near 5 degrees Celsius, cold enough for breath to hang visible in the air, damp ground underfoot. The hour was approaching 2200. Major was no longer the inexperienced soldier who had landed in Normandy 10 months earlier. He had fought through the bocage. He had cleared houses room by room in Caen. During the Scheldt operations, he had been struck by a grenade blast that destroyed his left eye. Field surgeons recommended evacuation to England and removal from frontline duty. He refused. "I can still see through the other one," he reportedly told medical staff. "A sniper only needs one." He returned to his unit wearing an eye patch and resumed combat operations. His depth perception was altered, his field of vision reduced, but his marksmanship remained precise. By April 1945, he was a veteran of Normandy, the Channel ports, the Scheldt, and the push through the Netherlands. Now the Canadian Brigade faced a decision: assault the city with artillery preparation, or confirm whether German forces were actually prepared to resist. A reconnaissance patrol was required. Major volunteered. Only one other man stepped forward, Corporal Willie Arsenault. The two stood before their company commander beside a camouflaged truck. A map was spread across the hood. Red grease pencil marked suspected German strong points. The commander looked at Major's eye patch for a moment before speaking. "You understand the situation," the officer said evenly. "If there's resistance, artillery begins at first light." Major nodded. "Yes, sir. You're going in to confirm enemy presence, not to engage. Observe. Report back." "Yes, sir." A brief pause. 8 kilometers, the officer added. "You'll be on foot. Radio silence unless necessary." Major studied the map. Entry from the east. Canal crossings, narrow streets. If Germans were dug in, urban fighting would be costly. "If we confirm they're dug in," Major asked, "then we level the strong points and move in. And the civilians?" The commander did not answer immediately. "That's not your concern tonight." Major folded the map carefully. "With respect, sir," he said quietly. "It is." There was no argument after that. The order stood: reconnaissance only. At approximately 2200, Major and Arsenault stepped off the road and into darkness. They carried Sten guns, sidearms, grenades. No heavy equipment, no radio beyond a short-range set, ammunition distributed evenly between them. If compromised, extraction would be unlikely. As they moved west toward Zwolle, Major considered the artillery plan. He had seen what preparatory bombardment did to towns in Normandy. Entire blocks reduced to rubble, civilians buried in cellars, streets impassable for armor after the very shells meant to clear them. If German forces inside Zwolle were light, scattered rear guards, Artillery would destroy the city unnecessarily. If they were strong, artillery would still destroy the city. There was a third option: convince the Germans they were facing a full-scale Canadian assault before dawn, force them to withdraw voluntarily, create confusion, noise, pressure, the illusion of overwhelming force. It would require movement, aggression, risk beyond reconnaissance parameters. Major did not say this aloud. The two men advanced along irrigation ditches and tree lines, closing the 8-kilometer distance steadily. No conversation beyond hand signals. Their boots made minimal sound on damp soil. The air carried distant mechanical noise from within the city. Engines, possibly trucks, preparing withdrawal. At the edge of Zwolle's outer structures, Major halted and crouched. Street lamps were dark. Windows shuttered. No visible German patrols at first glance. He turned to Arsenault. "If they're thin," Major said quietly, "we push them." Arsenault nodded once. No dramatics, no speeches, just acknowledgement. Behind them, several kilometers east, a Canadian artillery officer checked his watch under a hooded flashlight. Fire mission was scheduled to begin at 6 o'clock, unless countermanded. He noted the time, 22:47. In the distance, 2 Canadian soldiers disappeared into the streets of Zwolle. The guns remained silent. For now, the outskirts of Zwolle were quiet. Footsteps on cobblestone carried farther than expected. Each step produced a dull, hollow sound that seemed amplified in the still air. Somewhere deeper inside the city, a single rifle shot echoed, then silence again. A dog barked once, twice, then stopped abruptly. Private Leo Major and Corporal Arsenault moved along the shadow of a brick row house, staying tight to the wall. Street lamps were dark, curtains drawn. The city felt occupied, but tense. Ahead, at approximately 60 meters, stood the first German roadblock. 2 wooden carts overturned across the street. Sandbags stacked waist-high. A machine gun positioned behind them, at least 4 silhouettes visible in the low light. 1 cigarette ember flared briefly and vanished. Major signaled halt. They crouched behind a stone fence. The distance was short, close enough for grenades, too close for error. Major leaned toward Arsenault. "Quick and hard," he whispered. Arsenault nodded. They moved at the same time. Major rose first, firing a short burst from his Sten toward the machine gun nest. Arsenault flanked left, sprinting toward a doorway to create crossfire. A German soldier shouted. The machine gun swung. Gunfire erupted in the narrow street. Major dropped behind a low wall and fired again, controlled bursts, 5 to 7 rounds. A grenade left his hand and landed behind the sandbags. The explosion shattered glass and sent debris across the road. Then a single sharp crack cut through the chaos. Arsenault stumbled. He fell forward without a sound. Major shifted position immediately, firing toward the flash he had seen in a second-story window. The return fire ceased. For a moment, only dust and smoke moved in the street. Silence returned. Major waited 10 seconds, then 20. He advanced carefully toward Arsenault. There was nothing to be done. He removed extra ammunition from his fallen partner and checked the roadblock. 2 Germans were dead. 1 wounded, conscious but disoriented. Major dragged the wounded soldier into a recessed doorway and disarmed him. For a moment, the street was completely still. Major was alone. He could withdraw now, 8 kilometers back to Canadian lines. Report German presence. Artillery would begin at dawn. The mission, technically, was complete. He looked down the empty street toward the city center. 50,000 civilians. He made his decision. Major turned to the captured German soldier. "How many troops in the city?" he asked in French-accented but steady German. The soldier hesitated. Major pressed the muzzle of the Sten against the man's chest. "You are surrounded," Major said calmly. "2 Canadian battalions are entering from the east and south. Armor will be here before morning." The German's eyes widened. "That's not possible," he said. "It already happened," Major replied. "You are cut off." He leaned closer. "If your officers resist, the artillery begins at first light. The city will not survive." The German swallowed. Major stood. "Tell your command the Canadians are everywhere," he said. "Tell them you saw tanks." He released the prisoner and fired a burst into the air down a side street. Then he moved, fast. He shifted 2 blocks west, entered another street, and fired several single shots into a warehouse door. He threw a grenade into an empty alley, waited for the explosion, then sprinted north before the echo faded. He avoided staying in one location longer than 30 seconds. Shoot, move, change direction. Another burst of automatic fire near a canal bridge. Then silence. Then footsteps fading into another district. German sentries began firing blindly toward shadows. Orders were shouted. Whistles blew. Major crossed a small square and emptied a magazine into the facade of a municipal building before disappearing again into a narrow lane. To an observer, it sounded like multiple units probing from different directions. Within minutes, telephones were ringing inside German command posts. Officers demanded reports. Conflicting information arrived from separate sectors. Canadian infantry in the east. Machine gun fire near the canal. Grenades in the south quarter. No one could confirm numbers. In the darkness, one man continued moving. But inside the German headquarters, a field officer grabbed a telephone receiver and spoke sharply into it. His voice carried urgency now. Across Zwolle, nervous messages passed from one position to another. Uncertainty spread faster than gunfire. Something began to change in the city. Inside the German headquarters in Zwolle, confusion replaced routine. Approximately 200 to 300 Wehrmacht personnel remained in the city. Some were regular infantry, others were administrative staff, signal operators, transport drivers, rear echelon units pushed forward by the collapsing front. They had not expected a night assault. Telephones rang continuously. One report placed Canadian troops near the Eastern Canal. Another claimed machine gun fire in the southern district. A third described grenades detonating near a supply depot west of the market square. None of the reports agreed on numbers. In a second-floor office lit by a single shaded lamp, 2 German officers stood over a city map. "Multiple contact points," the first officer said, tapping the paper sharply. "East, south, and near the rail junction. This is coordinated. It is the beginning of a full-scale attack." The second officer shook his head. "No artillery, no sustained fire, no armor noise. These are scattered engagements, advance elements," the first replied. "They are fixing us in place before the main assault." Another telephone rang. An NCO answered, listened, then covered the receiver. "Shots fired again near the canal bridge," he reported. "Automatic weapon." Then silence. The first officer looked toward the window. "They are probing from several directions." The second officer frowned. "One unit is moving quickly." Outside, Private Leo Major shifted positions again. He fired a short, controlled burst down a narrow side street, then immediately moved north along a drainage ditch. He checked his watch briefly. 6 minutes since the last contact. Enough time to create separation. He crossed into a new district and fired 3 single shots, spaced deliberately apart, as if different men were signaling each other. Then he moved again. 5 to 7 minutes between engagements. Never twice from the same street. Noise in the east, then in the south, then in the industrial quarter. To German ears, it suggested multiple squads coordinating movement. In basements across Zwolle, civilians listened. Families sat on wooden crates and coal bins. Mothers pressed hands over children's mouths to quiet them. Every burst of gunfire echoed through brick foundations. Every explosion of a grenade sent dust from ceiling beams. Some believed the city was being stormed. Others feared artillery would begin at dawn. Above ground, Major located a building used by the local Gestapo. He recognized the insignia over the entrance. 2 guards stood near the doorway. He approached from behind a row of trees, closed distance to under 30 meters, and opened fire. The exchange was brief. Both guards fell. Major entered quickly, cleared the ground floor with methodical movement, then withdrew. Before leaving, he ignited papers and furniture using available fuel. Flames caught slowly, then spread along curtains and wooden desks. Within minutes, smoke rose above the roofline. He moved off before the fire grew visible from every quarter. In the German headquarters, a soldier rushed into the map room. "Fire at the security office," he said. "Large blaze." The first officer stared. "Sabotage," the second officer said quietly. Major heard distant shouts as the fire intensified. He paused briefly in an alley. The gunfire had value, but the fire carried farther. It suggested penetration, loss of control. He understood now that noise worked better than bullets. Chaos required sound. He fired again 2 streets away, then threw his last grenade into an empty courtyard to amplify the illusion. Back in headquarters, the debate sharpened. "This is no diversion," the first officer insisted. "They are inside the city." "With what strength?" the second demanded. "Where are their heavy weapons?" The telephone rang again. Reports of Canadians seen near the eastern warehouses. Reports of fighting near the central square. Reports of movement along the canal. No confirmation of numbers. The first officer leaned over the table. "If artillery begins at dawn, we will be trapped." The second officer hesitated. Outside, flames from the Gestapo building reflected faintly in the night sky. For the first time, one word was spoken clearly in the room: evacuation. Shortly after 2 o'clock, Leo Major intercepted another German patrol near a narrow intersection west of the central square. 3 soldiers, young, tired, weapons lowered slightly as they moved between positions. Major stepped from a doorway and leveled his Sten. "Hände hoch." They froze. He disarmed them quickly, searched for radios, maps, anything useful. None carried detailed orders. They were runners, likely shifting between sectors as confusion spread. He positioned them against a wall. "You will return to your command," he said in measured German. "You will deliver this message exactly." One of the soldiers stared at him, trying to determine how many Canadians were in the shadows behind him. "Tell them the city is surrounded." Major continued. "Canadian artillery is already ranged in. At first light, bombardment begins." He paused deliberately. "Resistance will destroy Zwolle." He stepped back and motioned east. "Go." They hesitated only a moment before disappearing into the darkness. Major moved again. His legs were heavy now. He had been in continuous motion for nearly 5 hours, running, firing, repositioning. The adrenaline that had sharpened his senses earlier was fading, replaced by fatigue and the cold damp of early morning. It was approaching 3 o'clock. He crossed into a small square where light flickered through the window of a local bar. The door stood slightly ajar. Voices inside. German. He approached from the side, listening. 4, possibly 5 men. Weapons stacked near a table, helmets off. One man laughing, forced, brittle. Major kicked the door open and fired immediately. The confined space magnified the sound. 2 Germans fell before they could reach their rifles. A third attempted to draw a pistol. Major fired again. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was over, the room was silent except for the ticking of cooling metal and the faint hiss of a damaged lamp. Major checked the bodies quickly. 1 survivor, wounded but conscious. He pulled the man upright. "How many units remain?" Major demanded. The soldier, shaken, muttered numbers, unclear, contradictory. Major leaned closer. "Your officers are leaving," he said flatly. "The Canadians are already inside the perimeter." He released the man and stepped back into the street. The fire from earlier still smoldered in the distance. Smoke drifted low between buildings. Major paused in the shadows of a doorway. He understood the scale of what he was doing. This was not reconnaissance anymore. He was gambling. If the garrison realized there was only 1 or 2 attackers, if a coordinated sweep began, he would be isolated within minutes. No reinforcement, no extraction, no artillery yet. Everything depended on uncertainty, on sound, on fear. He moved again, firing short bursts at irregular intervals, then silence, then another burst from a different street. He overturned trash bins to create additional noise, kicked doors, threw debris against shutters. Every report suggested movement. Every echo suggested numbers. Near the southern edge of the city, engines began to turn over. At first 1 truck, then another. German motorized units were gathering near an arterial road leading west. Headlights remained off, but silhouettes of vehicles were visible against the dim sky. Officers shouted orders. Equipment loaded quickly. No formal formation, just urgency. Major observed from behind a low wall, breathing controlled despite exhaustion. A column of trucks and light-armored vehicles began aligning toward the road out of Zwolle. Men climbed aboard in haste. He watched carefully. Withdrawal could mean success, or consolidation for counterattack. The engines grew louder, but he still did not know which. Dawn approached slowly over Zwolle. At approximately 4:30, the sky shifted from black to deep gray. Smoke from the burning Gestapo office drifted low across rooftops. The night's gunfire had faded. In its place came the mechanical rumble of engines. Leo Major watched from the shadow of a narrow side street. The German column was forming. 2 trucks in front. A pair of motorcycles moving between vehicles. Additional transport behind them. Rough estimate. Close to 100 soldiers assembling in haste. Equipment strapped loosely. No parade order. No defensive line. Withdrawal or maneuver. Major stepped back, breathing evenly. His uniform was damp, ammunition nearly exhausted. He had been alone for hours. If the column reached open ground and reorganized, they could sweep back through the city and discover the truth. He made a decision. Instead of remaining concealed, he stepped out into the street, openly. He moved toward the led vehicle as the first truck rolled forward at low speed. A German motorcycle patrol spotted him first. The rider braked hard. Shouts followed. Rifles were raised. Major did not run. He raised his weapon slightly, not aiming, just enough to signal confidence. An officer stepped down from the first truck. Captain's insignia, sidearm drawn but not pointed. They stood approximately 20 meters apart. The street was silent except for idling engines. The officer spoke first. "How many of you are in the city?" Major answered without hesitation. "Enough." The officer's jaw tightened. "You are surrounded." Major continued calmly. "Canadian infantry hold the eastern districts. Armor is positioned beyond the canal. Artillery is ranged on this road. He gestured subtly toward the outskirts. If you remain, bombardment begins at first light. The officer studied him carefully. You are alone, the officer said. Major did not respond immediately. Behind him, the city remained quiet. Thus, no visible troops, no armored vehicles, only smoke drifting in early light. Major held the officer's gaze. You've heard the firing all night, he said. You've received the reports. East Sector, South Sector, Central Square. He stepped forward one pace. You're already cut off. The officer's eyes flickered briefly toward his men. They were watching, listening. Seconds passed. No one fired. Major could feel the weight of it. The calculation unfolding behind the officer's expression. Risk versus survival. Pride versus responsibility. If the Canadian artillery truly opened at dawn, the column would be trapped in narrow streets. Casualties would be severe. Civilian presence complicated any defensive stand. If this was a bluff, then the opportunity to crush a small infiltration force was slipping away. The engines continued to idle. Major kept his posture steady, as if confident that dozens of rifles were trained from hidden windows behind him. Your choice, he said quietly. Another pause. Then the officer turned to his sergeant. Prepare to move west, he ordered. The words were clipped, controlled, but final. Orders passed down the line. Drivers engaged gears, motorcycles repositioned to the flanks. The column began rolling toward the western exit road. No shots fired, no last-minute reversals. Vehicle after vehicle passed Major's position. Some soldiers stared at him with confusion. Others avoided eye contact. Within minutes, the main body of German forces was leaving Zwolle. Major remained in the street long after the last truck disappeared beyond the bend. The city grew quiet again. No engines, no gunfire, only the distant sound of birds beginning to stir with morning light. He stood alone in the center of the road, and only then did he allow himself to exhale. Dawn broke fully over Zwolle just after 6 o'clock. Canadian forward elements advanced cautiously along the eastern approach roads, expecting resistance. Artillery batteries remained in position behind them, guns laid, fire missions pre-calculated. But no shells had been fired. Infantry patrols entered the outer streets first. Rifles ready, Bren gunners covering intersections, engineers scanning for mines or demolition charges. There were none. No machine gun nests, no barricades manned, only abandoned positions and the faint smell of smoke. A signal officer confirmed by radio German forces were withdrawing west. By 7:30, larger elements of the Canadian Army were moving into the city proper in organized formation. Trucks rolled past shuttered storefronts. Infantry advanced by section, clearing buildings methodically. Then something changed. Basement doors began to open, one at first, then another. Civilians emerged slowly into the early morning light. Elderly men in worn coats, women carrying children wrapped in blankets. Faces pale from sleeplessness. Many looked upward instinctively, expecting artillery that never came. They saw Canadian uniforms instead. Within minutes, word spread that the city had not been shelled, that the Germans were leaving, that the bombardment had not begun. People stepped into the streets. Some wept quietly. Others simply stood in disbelief. Approximately 50,000 civilians had remained inside Zwolle through the night. 50,000 who now stood in intact streets, among buildings that still had roofs and windows. The city was largely undamaged. No cratered boulevards, no collapsed blocks, just scattered bullet marks and a single burned-out Gestapo building. Near the central square, Leo Major waited. He had not slept. His uniform was streaked with mud and smoke, ammunition nearly depleted, one magazine partially full, a handful of loose rounds. When the 1st Canadian Patrol recognized him, they stared. "You alone?" one corporal asked. Major gave a brief nod. He was escorted to his company commander shortly afterward. The officer stepped down from a jeep and looked at him carefully, at the eye patch, at the soot on his sleeves, at the fatigue in his posture. "You were ordered to reconnoiter," the commander said evenly. "Yes, sir." The officer glanced around at the intact buildings, the absence of fighting. "Report. German forces withdrew before dawn." Major replied. "Motorized column. Approximately 100 soldiers in the final element I observed." The commander studied him for a moment. "How many were in the city?" Major did not hesitate. "Enough." A brief silence followed. The commander understood what that answer meant, and what it avoided. Artillery officers began standing down their batteries. Coordinates erased, fuses removed. The scheduled bombardment was cancelled officially at 8:10. Canadian units secured administrative buildings and key intersections without significant resistance. By midday, Zwolle was firmly under Allied control. There were no mass casualties, no flattened districts, no civilian dead from artillery, but the cost was not zero. Corporal Willie Arsenault lay where he had fallen during the initial engagement at the roadblock. His body was recovered by Canadian troops later that morning. One volunteer, one man who had stepped forward. Major did not speak during the recovery. The scale of what had been prevented became clear over the next hours. 50,000 civilians remained alive in homes that still stood. A city spared destruction, not by bombardment, but by uncertainty and calculated aggression. Major stood at the edge of the square as Canadian flags were raised over municipal buildings. He did not celebrate. The mission had succeeded. The city was liberated. But one man had not returned. The city was saved. But the night did not come without a price. In the weeks that followed, the liberation of Zwolle was recorded in operational reports as a limited engagement during the final Allied advance through the Netherlands. There was no major battle listed, no artillery preparation, no prolonged urban combat. Instead, the entry noted that German forces had withdrawn during the night of April 13th to 14th, 1945, ahead of Canadian occupation. What the reports did not fully capture was the scale of risk involved. Private Leo Major had entered a defended city alone after his partner was killed. He had operated for hours without support, ammunition resupply, or confirmed extraction. He had relied not on firepower, but on movement, timing, and psychological pressure. At the time, German forces in the region were collapsing westward toward Germany. Supply lines were fractured, communications unreliable, morale uneven. Major understood that uncertainty could be amplified into panic. He did not overpower a garrison. He convinced it to leave. For his actions in Zwolle, Leo Major was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal for the second time in his career. The first had been earned during the Scheldt campaign. It was an uncommon distinction, reflecting sustained combat performance under extreme conditions. After the war, he returned to civilian life in Quebec. He rarely spoke in detail about that night. Those who asked often received short answers. The facts were sufficient. Zwolle remained standing. 50,000 civilians survived without bombardment. A Canadian artillery barrage that had been ready at 6 o'clock never fired. Years later, the city of Zwolle formally recognized him. Streets were named, ceremonies held. But the essential truth of that night remained simple. One soldier made a calculation under pressure. And it worked. Not because it was reckless, but because it was measured. The liberation of Europe involved massive armies, coordinated offensives, and industrial-scale logistics. Yet sometimes, outcomes turned on individual decisions made in darkness, without witnesses. Leo Major's actions did not end the war, but in one city, on one night, they changed how it ended. If this story added something new to your understanding of World War II, consider supporting the channel. Hit like so more people discover these overlooked operations. Subscribe if you value detailed, fact-driven military history without exaggeration.